Good afternoon. I'm Gregory Johnson. I'm a director in the Governance Insights Center. Today, I'm joined by Matt DiGiuseppe. He's a managing director in the Governance Insights Center as well. We're going to get started with Universal Proxy. So, Matt, tell us about Universal Proxy and give us a little background on it.
Yeah, Gregory, happy to be here with you today. Universal Proxy is an interesting one. So last August, a new rule came in effect that actually fundamentally changed the way proxy fights are going to work, right? Traditionally, you had your management card, white or some variation, and the pink dissident card, and you'd get emails saying vote management or vote dissident, right? And there was sort of that push there. There's still going to be two cards. But what matters is, regardless of what proxy card you receive, the candidates that you can vote on will be all of the candidates up for election, those put forth by both management and the dissident. It's kind of like a ranked choice voting for directors, where those who receive the most votes will be seated. And it changes the way that investors are going to be doing their analysis, because it used to be sort of a game theory, right? Which card do you vote on? Which director's on which card? What do you think other folks are going to do to have the outcome that you want to have? This sort of allows for a little more of a clean voting situation, but it is a very significant change.
Yeah, and based on a few situations that we've seen so far, I think it may make it easier for dissidents to win seats, especially when you look at lagging company performance, or if a dissident puts forward an alternative strategy for an organization. And of course, we have more data so far on Universal Proxy than we do on pay versus performance, but there's some interesting things there as well. Can you tell us your take on it, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, on Universal Proxy, we've seen some of the results come in already, right? We could start to get a sense of how people are thinking about it. With pay for performance, we're just seeing, the early proxies start to be filed with this disclosure for the first time. And, shareholders had to amend their voting guidelines over the winter timeframe without having seen the disclosure at all, right? Directors had at least seen their own. Shareholders had nothing. And so when you look at sort of how proxy advisors and shareholders have responded, they've said, listen, this will be part of our analysis, but we have an approach to evaluating compensation programs that we're going to continue to sort of follow this year. And it will be interesting to see, how much of that is true. We've already seen some early trends that might suggest, given a tough market performance year last year, that shareholders could be a little more critical of comp this year. We don't know how this disclosure is necessarily going to play into that. But the reality is that I think it's easier to think about it in the context of, the CD&A disclosure, right? Back in 06, where the first disclosures were sort of, how do we follow the letter of the rule? And those disclosures have evolved so that companies are using them more to tell the story of how they think about using compensation as an incentive. I think we'll see something similar here, but maybe not to the same extent. We'll see also where this lands in the proxy. It might not be in the CD&A consistently or even close to it. So there's a lot of unknowns here that we're going to be closely monitoring as it evolves.
Yeah, I think a key there that you said is that there's a lot of unknowns. But with this new rule, it really is going to be more uniform going forward for companies. But this concept of lagging share price or changing share price year over year comparisons may lead to some companies focusing more short term versus long term. And obviously, share-based comp is really meant to incent long term performance. So that's going to be interesting.
The pay versus performance disclosure looks at sort of how equity prices have changed over the course of the year and how that's impacted sort of the compensation available to an executive. It has the potential to cause investors to lose sight of that long-term nature of equity, right? You might have seen a significant change in 1 year's value on something that's not going to be vesting for many years. And so I think that's an important element to think about as you're going through engagement activities and preparing for them, about how you create that sort of foundational understanding around sort of when some of this compensation becomes available. On the shareholder proposal side, there's one big one that I think is interesting, and that's around the prescriptiveness of the shareholder proposals. Last year, we started to see a separation, if you will, between the support for the sort of fundamental proposals that address a long-term risk to a company where the disclosures are lacking, right? Support for those proposals was up significantly, and those proposals continue to pass. Proposals that addressed issues that were maybe incremental to existing already strong disclosures, or tried to be prescriptive about how a company addressed a particular risk, saw waning support, and overall support for shareholder proposals fell. Last year, the SEC was much more permissive in terms of the proposals that it allowed through the no action process. This year, there's been a significant decrease in companies seeking no action relief, which would allow them to exclude a proposal from the ballot. That's partly because the no action process is not a costless process. So, right, companies might not want to invest in seeking no action if they don't feel like it's something that they can win. But it means that us, governance nerds who look to the no action process for early disclosure around the types of proposals that we're going to see is limited. So we have less insight into what's going to be on the ballot this year than we might have previous years. We have to rely on what we've heard from proponents in terms of their announcements of what they filed and where. And based on that data, it certainly appears like there are going to be a lot more of those prescriptive proposals this year than there are those general proposals. Mm-hmm. If I look ahead and I look into my crystal ball, I think that we may actually see another year of overall support for shareholder proposals falling because of that. But that doesn't mean that large investors are moving away from their views around the need for companies to address transparently those core risks that are identified. So I think it'll be very important during engagement for companies to think about not just sort of what does the voting pattern tell us, but what are we hearing the investors saying and how can we be responsive to that?
Yeah, and I think you hit on an important element, the importance of engagement and how you engage and who's going to engage with investors, because probably will be a surprise to folks that we're not going to see as many. We'll wait to see what the data shows us, but not as many traditional governance proposals where we've seen that institutional investors really focus on the G, and governance is really one of the most important elements. A couple of other things here is that when we look at some of the most prolific filers of proposals right now, those proposals are narrower in nature. So we'll see what the data shows us afterwards, and we'll have some more to talk about after this proxy season with folks.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about sort of the effort and sort of the proposals as being a pie that has to be divided up, if more of that is going towards the ENS and the advance notice bylaws from these prolific filers, then we might see fewer of those governance proposals this year.
Well, thank you, Matt. We're certainly looking forward to an interesting proxy season. We encourage you to look at our proxy season preview document on our website, and we'll be back to you after this proxy season, and hopefully our predictions have come true for this proxy season. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.